I discovered my prize-winning hydrangeas were missing on a Tuesday morning in late April, and something told me this was going to get ugly fast. My name is Ryan Yates, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for exactly 8 months when everything went sideways. I had moved here after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a nice planned community would be exactly what I needed. The house was a 3-bedroom Spanish colonial with a backyard that backed up to the community green space, and I had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours turning that garden into something special. The hydrangeas were just the beginning. Over the next week, I noticed my Japanese maple sapling had vanished, along with 3 expensive rose bushes I had planted along the side fence. At first, I thought maybe some brazen thieves were hitting the neighborhood at night. But then I installed security cameras, and what I caught on film made my blood boil. It was Patricia Morrison, the HOA president, along with 2 other board members, walking into my backyard during their monthly inspection with a dolly and garden spades. They were not just inspecting. They were shopping. The footage was crystal clear. Patricia, a 50-something woman with an aggressive blonde bob and the kind of pursed lips that suggested she had been complaining about something since birth, pointed at my lavender bushes while holding a clipboard. The other 2 women, whom I later learned were Deborah and Susan, nodded along like obedient disciples. Then, bold as brass, they started digging up my plants. I watched the video 3 times before I could even process what I was seeing. They were loading my expensive landscaping into a wheelbarrow like they were shopping at a garden center, except this garden center was my private property, and nothing was for sale. I called the non-emergency police line immediately. The dispatcher sounded skeptical when I explained that my HOA was stealing my plants, but she took down my information and said an officer would come by to take a report. Officer Martinez showed up about 2 hours later. He was a young guy, maybe late 20s, with the kind of expression that suggested he had seen everything and nothing surprised him anymore. I showed him the security footage on my laptop, and I watched his eyebrows climb higher with each passing second. "That is definitely theft," he said, leaning back in my kitchen chair. "How much would you say these plants are worth?" I had kept all my receipts because I had planned to write off some of the landscaping on my taxes. I pulled out the folder and started adding things up. The hydrangeas alone had cost $400 because they were mature plants from a specialty nursery. The Japanese maple was $600. The roses were about $300 total. Then there were the lavender bushes, some ornamental grasses, and a few other perennials. "We are looking at around $2,000, I said, feeling my jaw tighten. "And that is just replacement cost. Some of these plants took months to establish." Officer Martinez whistled low. "That puts this in felony territory if it is over $1,000. "Do you know where the plants might be now?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said. I had been doing some reconnaissance that morning. Patricia Morrison lived 4 streets over in the largest house in the development, and her front yard had recently gotten a dramatic upgrade. When I drove by earlier, I had spotted my hydrangeas flanking her front porch, still in the decorative ceramic pots I had planted them in. We drove over in Officer Martinez's patrol car, and sure enough, there they were. My hydrangeas, my ceramic pots, even the decorative stones I had arranged around the base. Patricia had not even bothered to transplant them or hide the evidence. "Wait here," Officer Martinez said. He walked up to the front door and knocked. I watched from the patrol car as Patricia answered, her face shifting from confused to defensive in about 3 seconds. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes, with Patricia's gestures getting increasingly animated. At one point, she jabbed her finger toward her clipboard, which she had apparently run back inside to grab. Officer Martinez returned to the car with a grim expression. She claims the HOA bylaws give her the right to remove any non-compliant landscaping during inspections. She says your plants violated some code about approved species. That is insane, I said. Even if that were true and it is not, she does not get to just take them for herself. That is still theft. I agree, Officer Martinez said. I am going to file this report as theft, and I strongly suggest you contact a lawyer. This sounds like a civil matter on top of the criminal one. In the meantime, I would recommend documenting everything, keeping those cameras rolling and not confronting anyone yourself. Let the system work. I thanked him and went home, but I was not about to just sit around waiting. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Arizona HOA law and theft statutes. What I found was infuriating. HOAs in Arizona had broad powers, but they absolutely did not have the right to confiscate homeowner property without due process, and they certainly could not keep that property for their own personal use. The next morning, I received a notice from the HOA in my mailbox. It was a formal violation letter, printed on official Meadowbrook Estates letterhead, informing me that I had planted unauthorized species in my yard, and that the board had been forced to remove them for compliance purposes. There would be a $500 fine for the initial violation, plus $100 per day until I brought my landscaping into compliance with community standards. I actually laughed when I read it. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. They had stolen my plants, and now they were fining me for not having plants. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was James Fletcher, and he specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation, sent him the security footage, and forwarded him all my documentation. This is one of the more blatant cases I have seen, James said during our phone consultation. The good news is you have excellent evidence. The bad news is HOA disputes can get messy and expensive. Are you prepared for a fight? Absolutely, I said. I am not letting them get away with this. Good. I will draft a cease and desist letter and a demand for return of property. We will also file a civil suit for theft, conversion, and abuse of authority. If they have done this to you, they have probably done it to others. Start asking around your neighborhood. That was good advice. I spent the next few days talking to neighbors, and what I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Patricia Morrison and her board had been systematically removing plants from yards across the development for at least 2 years. Most homeowners had been too intimidated to fight back, especially after being hit with fines and threats of liens on their properties. I met with a guy named Tom Chen who lived on Saguaro Drive. He invited me in for coffee and showed me his own violation notices. She took about $1,000 worth of desert plants from my front yard last year, he said, his frustration still evident. Claimed they were not on the approved list, even though they are native species. When I went to the board meeting to complain, she shot me down and said if I did not like the rules, I could sell my house. Did you see where the plants went? I asked. Tom nodded grimly. 3 of them ended up in the landscaping around the community clubhouse. The rest I think she sold. I saw her posting on Facebook Marketplace about selling mature agave plants right around the same time mine disappeared. That is unbelievable, I said. We need to document all of this. Would you be willing to make a statement? Absolutely, Tom said. I am tired of her treating this place like her personal kingdom. Over the next week, I compiled statements from 6 different homeowners who had experienced similar theft. The total value of stolen plants was well over $10,000. Some people had lost entire garden beds. Others had watched expensive trees disappear during emergency removals that were never explained. James Fletcher was thrilled with the evidence. This is a pattern of conduct. We can make a case for racketeering if we really want to push it. But let me start with the civil suit and see how they respond. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. Patricia Morrison called me 6 times. I did not answer. She left increasingly unhinged voicemails threatening me with more fines, legal action, and even a forced sale of my home. "You are making a huge mistake," her last voicemail said, her voice shaking with rage. "The HOA has legal authority here, and you are going to regret challenging us. I will make sure you never have a moment of peace in this community." I saved all the voicemails and forwarded them to James. "She is digging herself deeper," he said, sounding almost gleeful. "Harassment and intimidation on top of everything else. Keep records of everything." The HOA held an emergency board meeting that Wednesday. I was not invited, but 3 of my neighbors who were sympathetic to my situation attended and recorded the proceedings. Arizona is a one-party consent state, so the recordings were perfectly legal. Patricia spent most of the meeting ranting about troublemakers and people who do not respect community standards. She claimed I was trying to destroy property values and turn the neighborhood into a circus. She proposed increasing my fines to $1,000 per day and moving forward with placing a lien on my house. "We need to send a message," she said on the recording, her voice dripping with venom. "If we let people like Ryan Yates walk all over us, every homeowner will think they can do whatever they want. Rules exist for a reason." One board member, a quiet woman named Carol, tentatively asked if maybe they should consult with the HOA's attorney before taking such aggressive action, especially given the lawsuit. "We do not need an attorney," Patricia snapped. "I have been running this board for 8 years. I know what I am doing." That recording was gold. James added it to our evidence file. The preliminary hearing for the civil case was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the Detective Division of the Scottsdale Police Department opened a criminal investigation into the theft allegations. Detective Sarah Brennan was assigned to the case. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who took extensive notes and asked detailed questions. "The issue we are running into," Detective Brennan explained during our second meeting, "is that we need to prove intent. Patricia Morrison is claiming she genuinely believed she had the authority to remove the plants under HOA rules. That makes it tricky from a criminal prosecution standpoint." "But she kept them for herself," I said. "She put my plants in her own yard. How is that not theft?" "Oh, it probably is," Detective Brennan said. "I am just explaining how her defense attorney will argue it, but the good news is we found more evidence. We executed a search warrant on her property yesterday, and we found plants from at least 4 other homeowners. She had a whole nursery operation going in her backyard. We also found records showing she has been selling plants online for the past 18 months. So she is running a business with stolen merchandise," I said. "Exactly. That changes the calculus significantly. We are building a case for organized theft and fraud. It is going to take some time, but I think we can make this stick." While the criminal investigation churned forward, the civil case was moving faster. James filed a motion for preliminary injunction to prevent the HOA from assessing any more fines against me or placing a lien on my property. The judge granted it within 48 hours, which James said was a very good sign. The judge saw the security footage and read Patricia's threatening voicemails, James explained. She was not impressed. The order also prohibits any HOA board member from entering your property without your explicit written permission. Patricia violated that order within a week. I caught her on camera walking through my side gate, apparently to check if I had replanted anything. She spent about 5 minutes poking around my garden beds, taking photos with her phone, before leaving. I sent the footage to James immediately. She just handed us a contempt of court charge, James said. Some people really do not know when to stop digging. The judge was even less impressed the second time around. At the next hearing, she ordered Patricia to pay a $1,000 fine for violating the protective order and issued a stern warning that any further violations would result in jail time. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. Her face turned an alarming shade of red, and she started to argue with the judge before her attorney physically put a hand on her arm to shut her up. That hearing was when things really started to unravel for Patricia and the HOA board. Under questioning from James, Patricia was forced to admit that she had indeed taken plants from multiple properties. She tried to spin it as property management and community beautification. But when James produced the Facebook marketplace listings and bank records showing she had deposited over $15,000 from plant sales in the past year, her story fell apart completely. "So you were not just removing non-compliant plants," James said, his voice calm and measured. "You were running a for-profit business using stolen property from homeowners in your community. Is that correct?" "I was not stealing," Patricia said, her voice rising. "The HOA bylaws give us the authority to maintain community standards. The bylaws give you the authority to issue violations and fines through proper channels," James countered. "They do not give you the authority to confiscate private property and sell it for personal profit. That is called theft, Mrs. Morrison." The judge agreed. She ruled in my favor on every count and awarded damages that included the full replacement value of my plants, compensation for my time and emotional distress, and attorney fees. The total came to just over $30,000. But the civil judgment was just the beginning. Detective Brennan had been busy building the criminal case, and 2 weeks after the civil trial ended, Patricia Morrison was arrested on multiple felony charges including theft, fraud, and abuse of authority. The arrest happened at a HOA board meeting, which I thought was poetic justice. I was not there, but Tom Chen was, and he gave me a full report. Patricia had been in the middle of another tirade about property values when Detective Brennan and 2 uniformed officers walked in. The look on Patricia's face, according to Tom, was priceless. She actually tried to argue with them, Tom said, laughing despite the serious situation. She kept saying they could not arrest her because she was conducting official HOA business. Detective Brennan just put the handcuffs on and read her her rights while Patricia sputtered like a broken faucet. 2 other board members, Deborah and Susan, were also arrested as accomplices. Apparently, they had been helping Patricia with the plant theft operation and had received payments for their assistance. The story hit the local news that evening. HOA president arrested for allegedly stealing thousands in plants from homeowners was the headline on Channel 12. They showed Patricia's mugshot, which captured her mid-scowl and interviewed several victims, including me. I kept my comments brief and factual. "I just want people to know that HOAs are not above the law," I said to the reporter. "They have responsibilities to homeowners, not the other way around. What happened here was theft, plain and simple, and I am glad the justice system is taking it seriously." The interview aired during the 6 o'clock news, and my phone started blowing up immediately. Neighbors I had never spoken to before were reaching out to thank me. People from other HOAs in Scottsdale and Phoenix were asking for advice about their own disputes. A few lawyers even called to congratulate me on the win, and ask if they could refer clients. The criminal trial took several months to work through the system. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried every trick in the book to get the charges dismissed or reduced. They argued that the HOA bylaws were ambiguous, that Patricia had been acting in good faith, that there was no criminal intent. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the bank records, the testimony from multiple victims, the plants found in Patricia's possession, and her own Facebook marketplace listings created an airtight case. In the end, Patricia took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to all the victims. The total restitution amount was over $40,000. Deborah and Susan also took plea deals. They each got 6 months of jail time and 3 years of probation. All 3 women were permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The legal victory was satisfying, but the real work was just beginning. With Patricia and her cronies gone, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA needed new leadership. A special election was held, and a slate of reform-minded candidates won in a landslide. The new board's first action was to hire a professional management company and implement transparent procedures for all HOA activities. Tom Chen was elected president. His first call was to me. "We want to make sure this never happens again," he said. "Would you be willing to serve on a committee to rewrite the bylaws?" I agreed, though I made it clear I had no interest in being on the board itself. I had had enough drama to last a lifetime, but I did want to help create a system that protected homeowners and prevented future abuse. We spent 6 months overhauling the bylaws. We implemented strict rules about property access, requiring written notice and homeowner consent before any HOA representative could enter private property. We created an appeals process for violations with clear timelines and standards. We required financial transparency, including quarterly reports and annual audits, and we added provisions for removing board members who abused their authority. The new bylaws were approved by an overwhelming majority of homeowners. Meadowbrook Estates was becoming the kind of community I had hoped for when I first moved in. My garden, meanwhile, was flourishing again. I had replanted everything with the restitution money, plus added some new features. I put in a koi pond and a Japanese garden area with a small bridge. I planted more roses, some butterfly bushes, and a whole bed of native Arizona wildflowers. I even splurged on a mature palo verde tree that provided beautiful shade over my back patio. One Saturday afternoon in late October, about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was working in the garden when my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, so I was surprised to find Carol, the former board member who had suggested consulting an attorney during that infamous meeting, standing on my porch with a basket of homemade cookies. "I wanted to apologize," she said, looking genuinely contrite. I knew what Patricia was doing was wrong, but I was too afraid to stand up to her. "I should have said something sooner. I should have backed you up." I invited her in, and we talked for over an hour. Carol explained that Patricia had been a bully from the beginning, silencing dissent, and threatening anyone who questioned her decisions. Several people had tried to challenge her over the years, but she had always found ways to make their lives miserable until they either fell in line or moved away. "You were the first person who actually fought back and won," Carol said. "You showed everyone that she was not invincible. I am grateful for that, even though I am ashamed I did not have the courage to do it myself." I appreciated her honesty. "It took a lot of work and a lot of money," I said. and a lot of stress, but it was worth it. Nobody should have to live under that kind of tyranny, Carol nodded. The new board is doing a great job. Tom is wonderful, and the community feels different now. People are not walking around afraid all the time. She was right. The change in atmosphere was noticeable. People were friendlier, more relaxed. Homeowners were actually improving their properties without fear of arbitrary retaliation. Kids were playing in the streets again. It felt like a real neighborhood instead of a police state. The local media ran a follow-up story 6 months after Patricia's conviction. Meadowbrook Estates, from HOA nightmare to model community, was the headline. They interviewed several residents, including me, Tom, and even Carol. The story highlighted how the community had transformed itself after removing corrupt leadership. This is what happens when homeowners stand up for their rights, Tom said in the interview. HOAs can be valuable when they are run properly, with transparency and respect for the people they serve. But when they become vehicles for personal power and profit, they need to be dismantled and rebuilt. The reporter asked me if I had any advice for homeowners dealing with similar situations. I thought about it for a moment before answering. Document everything, I said. Keep records, install cameras if you need to, and do not be afraid to get lawyers and law enforcement involved. HOAs count on people being too intimidated or too tired to fight back. But property rights matter, and the law is on your side if you are being victimized. Also, talk to your neighbors. You are probably not the only one being targeted, and there is strength in numbers. The story got picked up by national news outlets and went viral online. I started getting interview requests from all over the country. Apparently, HOA horror stories were a hot topic, and people were hungry for examples of homeowners successfully fighting back. I did a few interviews, always trying to focus on the practical lessons and the importance of community organizing. I did not want to just be the guy who got his plants stolen. I wanted to be part of a larger conversation about HOA reform and homeowner rights. That conversation led to some interesting opportunities. I was invited to speak at a national HOA reform conference in Denver. I testified before the Arizona State Legislature about proposed HOA reform legislation. I even helped launch a website connecting homeowners with resources and attorneys for HOA disputes. Through all of this, I kept up my garden. It became something of a showcase. People would drive by just to see what I had done with the space. I installed better lighting, added more water features, and created different themed areas. The Japanese garden transitioned into a Mediterranean section with olive trees and lavender, which then flowed into a desert native area with saguaros, ocotillos, and prickly pear. I started hosting garden tours on the first Saturday of each month. Neighbors and gardening enthusiasts would come through, and I would share tips about desert landscaping, water conservation, and plant selection. It became a community event, with people bringing coffee and pastries and staying to chat. The garden tours led to another unexpected development. A woman named Hannah Kimball started showing up regularly. She was a landscape architect who had recently moved to Scottsdale from Portland. She was funny, smart, and passionate about sustainable gardening. We started talking more, and those conversations turned into coffee dates, which turned into dinner dates. Hannah had her own HOA horror story from her previous home in Oregon, so she understood what I had been through. She was impressed by how I had turned a negative situation into positive community action. Most people would have just taken the money and moved on, she said over dinner one night at a little Italian place in Old Town Scottsdale. But you actually made things better for everyone. That says a lot about your character. I felt myself blushing, which was ridiculous for a 42-year-old man. I just did what needed to be done, I said. I could not let them get away with it. Well, I admire that, Hannah said, and your garden is beautiful. You have a real eye for design. We started spending more time together. Hannah gave me professional advice on some of my more ambitious landscaping projects. I helped her settle into her new home and connected her with the right contractors and suppliers. It felt natural and easy, which was a welcome change after the chaos of the previous year. One afternoon in early spring, almost exactly a year after I first discovered my hydrangeas missing, Hannah and I were working together in my garden when Tom Chen stopped by with surprising news. Patricia Morrison is being sued again, Tom said, unable to hide his grin. Apparently, she did the same thing at her previous HOA before moving to Meadowbrook Estates. Those homeowners saw the news coverage and realized what had happened to them. They filed a class action suit. Good, I said. She deserves everything coming to her. There is more, Tom continued. The Arizona Attorney General is launching an investigation into HOA fraud statewide. Our case is being used as the primary example. They think this kind of theft and abuse is way more common than anyone realized. That investigation would eventually lead to significant reforms in Arizona HOA law, including stricter oversight, better protections for homeowners, and real penalties for board members who abuse their positions. But that spring afternoon, we just celebrated the small victory of knowing that Patricia Morrison would continue facing consequences for her actions. Hannah squeezed my hand. You started something important, she said. This is bigger than just your plants now. She was right, but I tried not to let it go to my head. I was just a guy who wanted to grow a nice garden and live peacefully in his home. The fact that standing up for those simple things had sparked a wider movement was gratifying, but also a little overwhelming. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. The HOA functioned smoothly under Tom's leadership. The community continued to improve. My garden matured beautifully, and my relationship with Hannah deepened into something serious and meaningful. We got engaged on a warm evening in October, right there in the garden where everything had started. I had planned an elaborate proposal involving her favorite flowers and a custom bench I had built for the Japanese garden area. But in the moment, it just felt right to keep it simple. This garden represents a lot of things, I said, holding both her hands. It is about beauty and growth, but it is also about standing up for what matters and not letting anyone take away what is yours. I want to build a life with you that has those same qualities. Will you marry me? She said yes before I even finished the question. The wedding took place the following spring in the garden, naturally. It was a small ceremony with close friends and family. Tom Chen was my best man. Several of the neighbors who had supported me during the HOA battle were there. Even Detective Brennan came, which I thought was incredibly kind. As I stood there watching Hannah walk toward me through the garden paths I had created, past the hydrangeas and roses and Japanese maples that had once been stolen and then replaced, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not just for her, though she was the best thing to happen to me in years, but for the entire journey. Getting my plants stolen had been infuriating and stressful. Fighting Patricia Morrison and the corrupt HOA board had consumed months of my life and cost thousands of dollars. But it had also taught me that ordinary people can stand up to institutional bullying and win. It had brought a community together. It had led to real reforms that would help other homeowners, and it had ultimately brought me to this moment, in this garden with this woman. After the ceremony, during the reception, several people gave toasts. Tom talked about the transformation of Meadowbrook Estates and how my courage had inspired others to demand better from their HOA. One of the neighbors who had been a victim of Patricia's plant theft thanked me for giving her the confidence to fight back against other injustices in her life. Hannah's sister made everyone laugh with embarrassing stories from their childhood. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. "I moved to this neighborhood looking for a fresh start," I said, looking around at the faces of people who had become genuine friends. "I found that, and so much more. This community taught me that home is not just about the physical space you own. It is about the people around you, the relationships you build, and the willingness to fight for what matters. Thank you all for being part of this journey." The investigation by the Arizona Attorney General continued for over a year. They uncovered dozens of cases similar to mine across the state. The final report documented systematic abuse in multiple HOA communities, with corrupt board members stealing property, embezzling funds, and using their positions for personal enrichment. The report led to new legislation that fundamentally changed how HOAs operated in Arizona. Boards were now required to carry liability insurance. Financial audits became mandatory. Homeowners gained stronger appeal rights and protections against retaliatory actions, and criminal penalties for HOA fraud were significantly increased. I was invited to the signing ceremony when the governor signed the new law. It was surreal standing there in the state capitol, watching legislation that had been inspired in part by my stolen hydrangeas become official state law. "You made a real difference," the governor said when we shook hands after the ceremony. "Stories like yours shine a light on problems that too many people experience in silence. Thank you for speaking up." I thanked her, though I still felt odd being recognized for what had essentially been self-defense. I had not set out to reform HOA law in Arizona. I had just wanted my plants back and some accountability for the theft. But that was how change often happened, I realized. One person deciding they had had enough and refusing to back down. One person documenting the abuse and bringing it into the light. One person willing to spend the time and money and emotional energy to fight for what was right. Patricia Morrison served her full jail sentence and was released on probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Nevada and was working as a grocery store clerk. Part of her probation terms prohibited her from serving on any HOA board or holding any position of authority in a homeowners association. I did not feel sorry for her. She had made deliberate choices to steal from people, to abuse her authority, and to profit from the trust homeowners had placed in her. She had gotten off relatively lightly, in my opinion. A year and a half in jail was nothing compared to the stress and financial harm she had caused dozens of families. Deborah and Susan also served their sentences and quietly left the community. The new HOA board under Tom's leadership continued to operate with transparency and respect for homeowners. Violation notices were rare, and always came with clear explanations and reasonable timelines for compliance. The community fund was properly managed, and homeowners received regular financial reports. Meadowbrook Estates became something of a model for other communities. People from other HOAs would visit our board meetings to see how we had restructured our governance. Tom and I were frequently invited to speak at other neighborhoods about HOA reform and homeowner rights. Through all of this, I kept working on my garden. It had become a genuine passion. I took classes on landscape design and horticulture. I experimented with different plant combinations and sustainable watering systems. I added a vegetable garden and started growing tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Hannah and I bought a second property together about a year after we got married, a fixer-upper in Paradise Valley with enormous potential. We spent weekends working on that house and its neglected garden, slowly transforming it into something beautiful. Hannah's landscape architecture business was thriving, and she used both properties as showcases for her work. I had retired from my previous career in software development right before the HOA drama had started, so I had the time to devote to gardening and advocacy work. It was not what I had planned for my retirement, but it turned out to be far more fulfilling than I had imagined. On the 2-year anniversary of the day I discovered my hydrangeas missing, I stood in my garden in the early morning light and took stock of everything that had happened. The garden was more beautiful than ever. The neighborhood was thriving. Patricia Morrison was paying for her crimes. Arizona had better laws protecting homeowners, and I had a wonderful wife and a life that felt meaningful and full. It had all started with stolen plants and a refusal to accept that theft. Such a small thing in the grand scheme of life. But small things mattered. Property rights mattered. Standing up to bullies mattered. Documentation and persistence mattered. Community solidarity mattered. I thought about all the homeowners who were probably dealing with similar situations right now in Arizona and across the country. People facing corrupt HOA boards, arbitrary fines, stolen property, and systematic abuse of authority. I hope that stories like mine gave them courage to fight back, to demand better, to refuse to be victims. The legal system was not perfect, and justice was not always swift or certain. But it was possible. Change was possible. Standing up to institutional bullying and winning was possible. You just had to be willing to do the work, to document everything, to find good legal representation, and to refuse to back down even when things got difficult. Hannah came outside with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just reflecting," I said. "About how much has changed in 2 years." She leaned against me, and we stood there together looking at the garden in the morning light. The hydrangeas were blooming, massive blue and pink clusters that drew bees and butterflies. The roses were putting on their spring show. The koi were swimming lazily in the pond. Everything was green and growing and alive. "You built something beautiful here," Hannah said. "And I am not just talking about the plants." She was right. The garden was beautiful, but the community we had helped create was even more valuable. The relationships, the shared commitment to fairness and transparency, the knowledge that we could stand together against corruption and abuse. That was the real victory. I still got emails and calls from people facing HOA problems. I tried to help when I could, offering advice, connecting people with attorneys, sharing the strategies that had worked for me. I could not fight every battle, but I could at least provide some guidance and encouragement. Some cases were resolved quickly. Others dragged on for years. A few people gave up, worn down by the stress and expense. But many won their fights just like I had. Each victory made the next one easier, creating precedents and strengthening the legal framework for homeowner protections. The movement that had started with my stolen hydrangeas had grown into something much larger. National HOA reform organizations were citing our case in their advocacy work. State legislatures across the country were considering similar laws to what Arizona had passed. Attorneys were developing specialized practices in HOA law, armed with new tools and precedents for protecting homeowners. It was gratifying to be part of something bigger than myself, but I never forgot why I had started this fight in the first place. I just wanted to grow a nice garden in peace. I wanted to come home to beauty and tranquility, not theft and harassment. Those simple desires, multiplied across thousands of homeowners, had created a movement for change. As spring turned into summer, Hannah and I hosted more garden tours. We started a community garden club that met monthly to share tips and plants. Neighbors who had once been afraid to do anything creative with their yards were now experimenting with bold landscaping choices. The whole neighborhood was becoming more beautiful and more personal, reflecting the individual tastes and passions of the people who lived there. That was what a good HOA should enable, I thought. Not conformity and fear, but a baseline of maintenance standards that allowed for creativity and personal expression. Not arbitrary power, but fair rules applied consistently with proper process and appeals. Not secrecy and corruption, but transparency and accountability. Meadowbrook Estates had become that kind of community. We had learned the lessons the hard way, through theft and abuse and legal battles. But we had learned them, and we were better for it. One afternoon in late July, I was watering the roses when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They looked nervous and excited in the way people do when they are house hunting. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "We are thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood. Can you tell us about the HOA?" I smiled, set down my watering hose, and walked over to the fence. This was a question I had answered many times over the past 2 years, and I never got tired of it. "Let me tell you a story," I said.